Now, in April of this year, the BITS School of Management, or BITSoM, launched something with a very specific target. 100 global scale AI startups in 3 years. Each one turned from a raw idea into an enterprise validated product in just 90 days. It's called the AI Accelerator, and it stands inside a business school that already made headlines for a very different reason. No AI product, no MBA degree, but a rule by the dean, yes, Professor Saravanan Kesavan, who put in place because he believes most Indian AI startups unfortunately hit a wall or collapse, not from a lack of talent, but from never getting close enough to a real enterprise problem worth solving. Now, Professor Saravanan Kesavan is the Dean at BITSoM, and he's joining me exclusively on Front Page today to have a conversation about what lies ahead as far as the entire ecosystem is concerned and how a wonderful institution as BITSoM is probably shaping the future of India. Welcome to Front Page, sir. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Really looking forward to the conversation. Actually, I want to start with this, Professor, the fact that you spoke about the idea of the AI accelerator's entire premise. I want to start there. 100 global scale AI startups in 3 years, which are built by solving enterprise problems, not by chasing generic, let's say, consumer AI apps. So why does the next generation of Indian AI unicorns need to look completely differently from the last one?
Absolutely. Now, first of all, I want to, I think we are at a momentous time in the history, right? I think the opportunities that are in front of entrepreneurs is never been greater. I mean, at least since electrification, right? I think the invent of AI is often compared, the impact of AI on the world is often compared to what happened with electrification that started in sometime in like the 1880s.
Right.
Right. I think in 1880s, the world started electrifying, and it's been about 150 years, and we are still continuing to electrify. I mean, it's a long project, and it's created numerous unicorns, and if you look at that number of companies that have gone on to do really well. I mean, you have like GE, the Westinghouse, Toshiba, and then there are many, Whirlpool. There are so many companies that have actually like started due to electrification, and they're still there. So similarly, we are at one such point where AI has become this new technology, right? And what I see around me when I talk to enterprises, especially the traditional companies, which as opposed to the AI native companies, right? I mean, these traditional companies are, I would say like 99.9% of the companies are traditional companies. And they are all absolutely eager to get onto the AI bandwagon, but they are unable to figure out exactly how to do that, right? So here is a classic case of a demand, like, excessive demand, I would say, like 99.9% of the companies, enterprises wanting solutions, and then we don't have like enough solutions for them. And let me be clear, I mean, the lack of solutions is not on the technology at all. I mean, I think AI is getting more and more sophisticated, but honestly, already like what the companies need is already delivered. Just I remember, a month back, we had like one of the large companies of India, they came over to BITSoM, and they wanted to build AI capability in the firm. And the first thing they start off by saying is that, like, look, our AI models are fine, right? So we're not looking for technical help. We have enough AI models. What we want is to be able to adopt AI in the organization. And that really is a big problem now. And startups and people who can actually address this problem could be the next GE, the next Whirlpool, the next the next set of companies that are going to be able to ride this wave and become unicorns. I'm 100% sure about that.
Wonderful thought, to be honest. But also, Professor, I'd like to kind of add to what you were just talking about. You talked about electrification. I do understand and I 100% agree that it was one of, in a big way, a genesis moment, so to say, as far as, the overall world culture goes. But the technology was relatively simpler when we compare it with, let's say, AI. AI is far more complex. And yes, I do believe we are at the nascent stage of AI. There is a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of excitement around AI. But I think you hit the nail on the head when you talk about the fact that, enterprises are excited. They want to get onto the bandwagon. But there is also this element of FOMO, right? They have this entire aspect of fear of missing out in terms of the fact that, they don't know. And that's exactly what you're probably trying to address. Because implementation or adoption is a very different sort of a method, purely also because of the way the entire technology is evolving at that kind of speed. So a lot of people are kind of lost. I hope you agree with me.
Yes, let me just address the first point. I mean, you said you started off with the premise that electrification is actually a simpler technology, right? And looking back, it might look simple now, but
Sure.
if let's move back to 1880, right, which is the start of building of the electric grids. In fact,
Correct.
I
Fair
think
point.
in 2 years, 1880 to 1882, there were like 50 homes in New York City that got the first electricity.
Right.
Now, electricity was not something invented by humans. I mean, even before 600 BCE, I think there's a record of people noting the electric spark, right? So,
Sure.
what really happened with electrification, especially, was the ability to actually create a steady flow of current rather than a spark, right? And that required a generator and a battery, and that's a Volta's battery and the Michael Faraday's generator that actually were the critical innovations. And once those innovations came through, I mean, there was a huge investment that had to be made. I mean, for example, if you look at the electric cables, there are
Yep.
about 42 million miles of cables, and that's like around the world, and that's like half the way to the sun, right? So this is, I would say, I mean, electrification itself was a huge endeavor, right? I think
For sure.
yeah, and I think it's the same thing here with the organizations too. The technology, the AI technology itself. I mean, it is complex, but honestly, I mean, I think it's from an enterprise standpoint, it's not the technology itself. It's not the model. I mean, I don't think an organization is going to gain a whole lot with using an open source model versus a open weights model. I think like there are some of those some of those technology barriers, I think, have been overcome for most companies, right? It's maybe at the cutting edge, bleeding edge, it makes a difference clearly, but for 90%, 95% of the companies, we are fine. The biggest challenge is actually implementing, right? It is
Correct.
basically the idea of like, how do you create, just like in electricity, we had to build the substations, the millions of miles of cable. How do you take copper to build this insulated material? That was a challenge, and that's the same challenge or similar challenge that organizations are facing. Organizations have done jobs in a certain way for like decades, right?
True.
And they have, and the if you look at everything, like the way people are trained, the way they are hired, the way the organizational setup is, everything has been premised based on a certain way the work is being done in an organization.
Correct.
AI has thrown a huge spanner in the works. I mean, one of the things that's actually happening now is like, organizations are being forced to rethink their entire workflows.
Correct.
How do we how do we get work done? I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, you have a customer coming in for most organizations, and the organization is providing value. Now, the question is, how do we provide this value? Do we now change?
Fair
How
point.
does AI enable me to provide that value to the customer? Can we do it at a cheaper, right? Can we do it in a better price? Can we provide better quality, more consistent service? All of that's possible with AI, but that's going to require a lot of re-engineering. And
Sure.
I think that's what, I mean, in my mind, I think the parallel is like, just like electrification required lots of changes, AI is going to require lots of changes for the companies to do. Now, your point about the FOMO is well taken. I do agree. I think, right now it is, every executive wants to, talks about AI in every other sentence, right? I
Correct.
think it's because there's pressure from all over. If you are
Probably
an
the
ex,
investors, maybe, Professor. I
yes,
mean, there are so many people who are driving that decision saying that, what, X company went ahead. I didn't mean X as X, but I mean, you got my point. So, X
yeah,
company went ahead and
yeah,
implemented
yeah,
AI. Why are you guys not doing it? I mean, maybe you're going
right,
to be left behind, etc., which I feel then becomes a huge hurdle, because then
absolutely,
you're not, as you mentioned yourself rightly, that you're not really actually viewing from a very, very concentrated point of view about your personal workflows and what's going
right,
to really enhance with the
yeah,
implementation of AI and what
yeah.
really doesn't require AI. That is not
Yeah.
happening, and which I think is making gaps.
Yes, you're right. I mean, look, I used to work in the US for 25 years. I just moved back to India just 2 years back. I know that in the US, this whole move to China wave started like a few decades back. I mean,
Right.
initially it was a trickle, and then it got to a point where if you're the CEO of of a company, you better have a China strategy, right? You need to, otherwise a board will pillory you for not thinking through it. So at one point, everybody was going to China, whether it made sense or not. And of course, we know what happened during COVID, and
Sure.
people had underestimated the risk, or are forced to ignore the risk because of the pressure from outside, and that led to suboptimal or bad decisions in many cases.
Hmm.
Similarly, here I think like there is going to be a situation where some companies are just going to get probably carried away and just use AI where they're not supposed to. And I have to admit that AI is actually a dangerous technology, and it can
True.
actually you could lose your job if you don't do it the right way, right? I
Absolutely.
think so. I think I think what is, but even before that, the problem I see now is like enterprises are like even struggling to make sense of how good is AI, or where should I use AI? Where should I, more
Correct.
importantly, where should I not use AI? This is not clear to them. There is no rule book that has yet been created. We are still in the early stages of understanding,
Sure.
where it makes sense and where it does not. So I think this is, in fact, I mean, one could think of it as challenge, or I could say that this is exactly the opportunity that you want to have. If you're in a startup company and work with the enterprises, understand what the challenges are, and and if you can come up with a solution, I mean, there are a large number of companies willing to lap you up.
Which is wonderfully said, actually, Professor. And that's where I believe the Accelerator AI program comes in, bang smack in the middle. Because
Yeah.
I believe also, and I want to address this with you, I believe also, as far as the India ecosystem is concerned, there is a mindset aspect. And I'll shed more light on it. Now, India has built its global tech reputation on services, which is wonderful. I mean, we've done it for over 3 decades. We are
Mhm.
probably champions of that entire cause. But we have been executing other people's ideas. Now, the
Mhm.
accelerator, I believe, and this is the way I understand it, is explicitly betting on product and IP ownership instead. Now, what, according to you, Professor, has to change inside, let's say, an Indian founder's thinking, mindset, to make that kind of leap from services to owning intellectual property that the world pays to use? And I think AI today can maybe hopefully accelerate that entire shift.
Yeah, I think that's a terrific point. And I think, look, I mean, in the previous way, obviously India benefited tremendously from building the software service industry, right? I think, created millions of jobs. I think the country as a whole benefited a lot.
Yeah,
But I don't know of a single company out there that did not want to move from services into products. And right, everybody wanted to do that.
true.
And unfortunately, there are very few that actually managed to make the transition. And I really think that this is the time
Hmm.
when companies should leverage, take the opportunity, and make that switch.
Hmm.
Now, a shift in technology is going to enable these companies to move on from the services mode. They've learned how to deal with the customer. The Indian software companies are masters of project management and delivering services, right? So now those are important and critical skills, definitely.
Sure.
And now they can hopefully use that and leverage this new technology shift that's happened and get on to building products. And now, what do we actually require, right? I mean, I think there's lots of changes that need to happen. First of
Hmm.
all, your one important thing is the mindset change.
Yep.
As a services company, I think we built the entire organization with doers. Now you need builders. Going from a doer mindset to a builder mindset is absolutely critical, and that is fundamentally different. Doer is somebody, you give the task and you want to make sure that you complete the task as efficiently as possible, right? I mean, builder, on the other
Sure.
hand, is like you have to be willing to take some risks, you have to be willing to fail. Not everything that you're going to do is going to succeed. And I think that that mindset change is critical, and I think this requires us to move from the kinds of people we would hire, possibly, from the kinds of people, the way we would induct them, how we would train them. And
True.
obviously, I'm a big believer that these changes in organizations have to be top down. I think it starts from the CEO and maybe the board even, and it has to percolate downward. So I think I think like that's an important aspect. And I think it's also as you get into from services to products, I think like you are taking ownership of the whole 360 degrees, right? It's no longer like as a services company, you might actually be you're talking to your vendor, your client.
Sure.
And the client, you might be talking to the IT team or the product team. I mean, that's you get the requirements from them and then you give it to them, right? So now as a product, you're no longer like, your interface with your client is not just about the IT team. Now
Yes.
you have to think about like three important people who are actually the reason why most AI projects fail, which is like, you need to talk to the HR folks. You need to talk about to the compliance team, and you need to talk to the legal team. And like, you have to think of
Agreed.
all the ramifications of what you're building on the client's on the client. So I think, it's a change in mindset, which requires a change in expertise and like being able to deal with different parts of the organization, which is why I think coming back to this AI, the venture that we have created is going to help startups talk to enterprises. And the key here is like, the enterprise can't just share like, a problem and say like, hey, go and figure out, right? I mean, as part of solving the problem, you need to get the 360-degree view. What's the legal implication, legal, HR, compliance ramifications of deploying AI. And honestly, like there are huge. In fact, like, there's some
Oh, yeah.
research by Stanford that shows that 35% of the projects that have failed, in their study actually failed because of these groups. It's not because of the technology failure, right? I
Sure.
mean, 35% because of that. And then there's another 25% of the reason was because the end user was not adopting it. So I think it's critical for the startups to be working with enterprises, and which is what, through our BITSOM AI incubator accelerator program, we want to enable.
It's interesting, Professor, that you just mentioned this, because I'm a very firm believer in the fact that, educational institutions, especially academia, who are leading the charge and are at the forefront, really need to have their pulse, really need to have their hand on the pulse of the industry and the enterprise. It's extremely important because, I mean, you're shaping young minds. You're setting them off on a path which is going to take them forward in terms of their journeys ahead. So something as an initiative as this, which is your rule yourself, I'd like to quote here, and I think it's a wonderful rule, which is at BITSOM, every graduating student must build a working AI product before they get their degree. Not harsh at all, Professor. But of course, is that rule producing better founders, according to you, Professor, or is it just producing, let's say, way better resumes in today's date? How do you, and why I'm asking you this is, how do you actually go ahead and measure this, let's say, 2 years down the line?
Yeah, so I think, see, before AI, I wouldn't have dared come up with a requirement like this, right? I think, if you look at the MBA program, or actually, like if you look, typically when you look at founders, they tend to come more from engineering institutes than from the MBA program, and there's a reason for that. It's when you're coming up with an innovation, usually there is a huge bar for technical expertise, and engineers are pretty good at that, right? So MBA students, on the other hand, understand the business, but they are not technical experts. We don't teach technical expertise. And there are also other reasons, probably the fee, whatever, like, that causes, them to more go work for organizations than be entrepreneurs. But what we are seeing now is this whole shift towards like entrepreneurship, because AI has reduced the bar of technical expertise required to start a company. I mean, there is, one of the big claims that around AI is that we are not too far away from seeing a unicorn with like one employee, right? I mean, one person being able to create
Although
that.
there are some companies in China, Professor, I'm sure you would have obviously heard of them. Only 2 or 3 people, and they're apparently posting billion-dollar turnovers, etc. Which then you realize was just, well, a lot of bells and whistles. But anyway.
Yeah. So I think, like, I mean, at least, I mean, look, it's how far it's true. It's the jury is still out. But on the other hand, it's earlier, like, it was just impossible to even think of making a claim that I can be a billion-dollar company with like 5 people, right? So now I think it can definitely be done. So I think because of all of this, it means that, like, MBA students should also be leveraging their background and this opportunity to become entrepreneurs if they wanted to. And I think, and I couldn't think of a better way to communicate that than by saying that, okay, you're going to build an AI product before you graduate, right? So, I can only teach. It's like otherwise I would be teaching them how to swim with slides and PowerPoints. And I think it goes only so far.
Agreed.
My methodology is like, okay, you're going to jump into the pool. I mean, maybe not the deep end of the pool initially, but we'll take you to the kiddie pool. But you need to swim. You're not getting out of this place without learning how to swim. So I think that's the big idea. And I think I think I should say, like, I don't know if I can claim credit for this, but I know that, just recently, like a couple of 4 graduate students from the recent batch actually reached back saying that, like, they are actually starting companies. And I mean, all the companies are on AI. So I think, so not surprising. So yeah, I mean, I think there's at least correlation, if not causation at this point. But I truly do believe that this will, especially this initiative, I think this is taking it a level farther than like saying like you need to build an AI product. And so this is, being able to observe in close quarters. You have the ringside view of like how a startup company is developing from concept to like idea, right? So, and again, see, I think there's a fundamental shift in the MBA program. We used to teach our MBA students how to build business plans. That's not sufficient anymore, I think. With AI, you don't have to build a business plan. You can actually build a minimum viable product, right? A prototype. You can do that. So we went from that. So, my thinking has also evolved in just the 2.5 years. Like last year when I said you have to build the product, I said, okay, no more business plan, build me a minimum viable product and show me. But this year I've actually gone even further because I realized that it's building a minimum viable product to actually a scalable solution is another beast of a problem, right?
Yes.
I want them to get exposed to that, which is why I have this new venture. They get to see how the startups are doing it.
Professor, my father taught me to swim exactly the same way as you put it. He threw me into the pool. So yeah, I know, it works.
Okay, all right.
But the fact that I want to ask you this, interestingly, I mean, because of AI, of course, the overall industry, in my understanding, is in a state of flux. So I believe programs like yourselves and probably a lot of other educational institutions and probably a lot of other, places as academia should encourage, in my head, that entire entrepreneurial mindset, which is exactly what you're driving today with your students. Because, I mean, let's face it, there are Indian IT services companies who are laying off people, and they seem to be in a state of almost loss. They don't know what to do. But maybe with AI now, there is an opportunity for people to say, oh right, wait a minute, why should I wait for the axe to fall? Let me go ahead and try to go ahead and build something on my own. It flies, it's wonderful, but at least I'm going to keep trying to do that. That was not the case earlier on. Do you agree with me or not?
I agree. I mean, like I said, look, this is the equivalent of the gold rush that happened, right? It's
Right.
This is the gold rush or the 1880s when you're basically at the advent of electricity and like electrification. Like if you are smart enough, you could build the next Westinghouse or the General Electric or the
Fabulous.
Toshiba or the company that's going to stand like, or they've been around for 150 years now. So
Sure.
honestly, like, I don't know when the next such opportunity is going to come. It's definitely not going to be in my lifetime. It's the last
Professor,
big
you're
one
very
was
young right
150
now,
years
please.
back. So it's like, it's 150 years back, and like now we are, and I really, really hope that India and our Indian students capitalize on it. And I think, we are doing our best at BITSoM to make sure that we get them everything that they need to succeed.
Wonderful. You
Yeah.
mentioned just shortly, you mentioned about the fact that it's a very different beast when you start to scale a product, etc. And I agree with you fully and completely, because there is this entire narrative about the death by 1,000 POCs, etc. I'm sure you would have obviously read about it, understood it. Probably
Yeah.
from that point of view, I want to ask you if you could maybe elaborate, Professor. Walk us through that. Elaborate on the fact that what actually, let's say, kills a prototype between a demo and a real customer, and what's that specific point where most founders tend to struggle dramatically, and they maybe probably throw up their hands, and that's probably what you're trying to mend.
Yeah. I think the challenge is that AI fundamentally is a probabilistic
Yeah.
technology. the world is used to deterministic technologies. I think there's something very fundamentally different between these two. Like, for example, I tell the CEOs, executives that look, if you go to let's say you want to get a payroll software in your organization, and you got your payroll software, and you essentially you tell one of the constraints you can throw in there is like, look, don't pay anybody more than, let's just make up a number, 5 lakhs, right? I mean,
Sure.
you put a constraint in there, and 100 out of 100 times the software will respect that, and it'll make sure that it'll never goes over that limit. That's not the case with AI, right? AI is a probabilistic one. So essentially, like, it's shown that about, depending on how you implement this constraint, you could actually get, like, about 3 to 5% of the time it might actually like exceed the constraint. Now this actually terrifies executives when they find out that that there's this like wonderful technology, but then it can actually like do something and they could lose their job.
Yep.
They actually like back out very, very quickly, right? And unfortunately what happens is this insight, either which is usually comes in once the risk, HR, legal, compliance team actually gets into the picture and understands the full ramification of the product, doesn't show up till much later. Because when you're building the
True.
prototype, you're like, you're just looking at the problem, you're trying to
Sure.
build a solution, and it all looks hunky and dory. And then, like, at some point much later, you figure out, okay, like 3 to 5% of the time you might actually get a different answer, and that is a deal breaker for many people, right? And honestly, it shouldn't be a deal breaker, is my point. It's a lack of education. It's like, it's a lack of information.
I
Like, for
agree.
example, like banks, I mean, like, you can't, it's a very few industries that are as careful about data as the BFSI industry, right?
Yep.
And I think if you look at so they basically, like, you would think that like they would use AI possibly for like internal operations, but like there's no way they can expose it to the outside world, because you can jailbreak and like get all kinds of possible customer data. But BFSI has worked it out in such a way that
Yes.
they put in guardrails, they figured out how to handle the risk. And now you have like a lot of companies in the BFSI industry that actually expose their chatbots and AI to the outside world. So there are ways to get around the problem, but it requires it requires, like, on both sides, like understanding what the
I
risk
agree.
is. And this is not like, AI is not a technology that is going to be it's not like a cure-all for all problems. And there are issues like hallucination, there are issues like sycophancy,
For sure.
but there are ways to get around it. There are ways to, in fact, use something like an hallucination to your advantage in like creative areas. So I think the maturity of enterprises is quite limited. And what the startups need to understand is that the maturity of the enterprises is limited, and it is their job to be able to communicate the risk
Valid point.
appropriately. They need to, rather than, like, find it out much later. And then, like, so this is actually like, quite a deal breaker in many, many situations. It's, like, going back to earlier conversation, it's, an executive, like, develops FOMO because, like, the board has asked them, like, okay,
Yeah.
what is your AI
Yeah.
strategy? I want next meeting, I want to understand, like, how many AI workflows you've implemented, what's the ROI. So they come in gung ho and tell the vice presidents, like, okay, I want you to implement AI. And the vice presidents go on, like, start bunch of ROIs, a bunch of projects, sorry. And then at some point they realize, oops, you know what, like, there is a risk
Correct.
that is involved, right? So I think this comes in much later, and I think everybody needs to be aware of what they're getting into.
Professor, then very quickly, I mean, before I get into the timeline aspect of things, which I thought was quite exciting, as far as the Accelerator AI program specifically is concerned, do you not think then that an institution like BITSOM or others should then go ahead and also bring their gravitas of these experiences to the enterprise? Because we all know it's an ecosystem which is still developing. We are still falling, we are dusting ourselves off because of AI, we are learning. So maybe, do you feel that that gap could be bridged in some way or the other for enterprises to be a little more patient, probably, and that might just help in the overall flourishing of the ecosystem from the startup point of view as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, my overall strategy is to make BITSOM like the #1 AI school in management, right? So I think that requires like several pieces falling together, and this AI Accelerator is one part of the big puzzle. I mean, like, there are other things which
I'm sure.
the other very big one is actually working with enterprises, understanding what the problems are. So we do that through executive education. We have like several clients. So that's where we learn, like, that's very critical for us to be in touch with the organizations so we understand what their
Yes.
pain points are, right? I mean,
Right.
we are, I might be a dean, but I'm also a researcher. I have, my
Wonderful.
research is in AI area. So I get really excited when I hear about problems because it actually gives me, gives me areas that we can work on to trying to figure out solutions. So I think, working with enterprises gives me what the problems are, and then like we try to develop solutions, and then like this AI accelerator is like part of this puzzle because it's not just the faculty, not just me and the rest of the faculty here. We are going to find like the best brains, the best
Sure.
most capable people, which are the startup founders. They are going to be coming in like help solve some of the pressing problems of the enterprises. And the hope is like as together we will evolve solutions and like methodologies and like we'll identify all the gotchas and so
Right.
that we can like help educate the industry. So I think ultimately, like as an educational institute, we want to be the fountainhead of knowledge, right? So I think that's what every educational institute aspires to be. And I think in this age of AI, we want to be known in this area. So
That's wonderful to know, to be honest, Professor, because I think that kind of an endeavor is needed in a big way. That constant marriage between, let's say, an enterprise, academia, probably that will influence a lot of government policies also moving forward, which I personally feel is a natural progression towards that perspective. Let's face it, Karnataka has announced its own AI university, which had never happened, right? So it's happening. I think the wheels are turning, and if you're wanting to lead the charge, I think that's wonderfully aspirational.
Yes, I mean, I think if you have to lead the charge, you have to do it from the front, right? I mean, I
Yes.
think you have to take the risks, and like, I think I think I'm blessed to be in a great institution, like with a great, tradition like BITS Pilani that has
Oh
actually
yeah.
been developing. I mean, like BITS Pilani has produced more founders and like more unicorns
It's a
than like most
legacy.
universities.
Correct.
Yes. So I think, in some ways, this entrepreneurship is actually it's in the fiber of the larger university. So we're just building on that, more on the AI side, on management. So yeah, I mean, I think absolutely, institutions have to lead from the front.
I
I
agree.
think, if there are certain incentives within institutions that allow us to take risks that a private player cannot do, right? I mean, that's like the
True.
tenure system, right? And like we have like tenure system for our professors because we tell them, look, don't worry about your job, go take the risk. Your job is to make sure that you push the frontier of knowledge, and we understand, like the more riskier the project, the greater the chance of failure. But that's okay. I mean, like we need
Also,
our faculty to be pushing it.
also the greater the chance of a reward, sir.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. I think, yes, I think we want to, I think like that's the bigger picture here, which is trying to see if we can, through one step at a time, right? I mean, at the end of the day, we are teaching, our biggest, most important players are definitely the students, and we want to make sure that our
For
students
sure.
are best prepared. And that requires us to work with the industry and like, and if that's going to require us to work with the government and, shaping policy, we are absolutely, and doing research and everything else, we
Wonderful.
absolutely would love to do. Yeah.
Wonderful. That's so encouraging to hear. Professor, I have to ask you about the 90-day bit as far as the accelerator's stated process is concerned.
Yeah.
Now, enterprise validated MVPs in 90 days. So the question I have for you is this. Again, going back to that entire little right now crease that one is trying to iron out between that enterprise and startup relationship. Is 90
Right.
days genuinely enough time to prove an enterprise will actually pay for something? Or is that more like going ahead and, saying that, all right, listen, we are on it, we are trying to create something wonderful and brilliant, and it's more like a buzz thing?
Honestly, I think like 90 days is more than enough, I think,
Okay?
in my mind, right? I mean, the biggest risk in all of these projects, right, is actually problem identification. So a lot of the startups actually struggle iterating over the problem, identifying, like, it takes a lot of time. And especially with AI, I mean, we have students who, we have this like 2-day program, which you do for like exec ed program. Where literally in 2 days, like students who have never built an AI agent, actually the next day they do AI agents and they actually do a demonstration of the agent that they've built. So AI is tremendously accelerated. So I'm really, so I think like if building an MVP within like 3 months is like too much time. I mean, I think like that. I think
Okay.
like time is not. Usually, the bigger problem is the problem identification, and that's what we want to reduce by identifying the enterprises, and that's what we do from BITSoM, right? And with our partner, which is Lens Solutions from Silicon Valley,
Right.
get those enterprises, refine the problem as much as possible so that the startups can actually come in on day one, like, they understand what the problem is, or they at least have a problem statement, and then they can start
Fair
working with the company to do it. So really, by reducing the problem identification time, and with the help of AI technology, which is super fast in terms of being able to build a minimum viable product, I think honestly, 3 months is ample time. Of course, like I said, we are experimenting, and if 3 months is too little, then we'll revise. I mean, we are always open to learning and and improving.
Fair enough. Professor, as far as Professor Arvind is concerned, he runs the program from the Bay Area. Now, explicitly positioning the Accelerator as a bridge connecting India's innovation ecosystem directly to Silicon Valley. Now, the question I have for you is this: what does India actually get from that bridge that it couldn't, let's say, get by just sending its best founders to San Francisco directly?
So that's a great question. I think a couple of things, even when I was in the US, I was actually working at University of North Carolina, which was on the East Coast. And one thing I always missed was the energy of Silicon Valley. Going in Palo Alto in the Stanford area, and you can literally feel innovation in the air, right? And I always have been like trying to figure out a way to get that, from even the West Coast to East Coast at that point. And when I came to BITSoM, and especially when I wanted to push this AI agenda, it was very clear to me that there has to be a bridge to Silicon Valley.
Okay.
And it is, in some ways, it is, there are a few different reasons. First is, I think when we talk to a lot of AI startup companies in India, this is their potential, the client that they want, the customer that they want is unfortunately like not the one in India. Like many of them want a customer in the US or in the Europe.
Why is
right?
that though?
This is there are several hypotheses I have, and one hypothesis I'm going to place the blame squarely on the feet of like Indian industry also.
Okay.
I think if you look at R&D, Indian R&D is, India spends about $75 billion per year in R&D. I think that's about 0.7% of GDP.
Which is true.
In US and China spend 10 times that amount.
Yep.
And, it's about 3.5% of the GDP, right? Now, here's the interesting thing. Like, where does this spend for R&D come from? Interestingly, in India, it's the government that actually spends the money in R&D. Private industries are not spending on R&D. And I think that is, honestly, it's a bit, I think that needs to be fixed. I think
sir, I 100% agree with you, because you're just trying to be very kind to the industry. According to me, it's abysmal, if you ask me, because research is something which at this given point in time is truly eroding our talent. People want to leave, people want to go away. And that is just gotten into a very vicious cycle. And I think a lot of industry leaders are aware of this. I had a conversation with Nikhil Malhotra, who is the head of innovations at Tech Mahindra, on the show. And he agreed to this, Professor. Absolutely. He said, I'm as guilty as anybody else.
Yeah, I think it's not something that I knew before I came to India. Not that it would have changed anything, but I've actually realized this only over a period of time, that Indian industry is not spending much on R&D, which was definitely not the case in the US. There's actually a very interesting pathway that they've created from university research to make it all the way to industry, right? And that here, I think there needs to be a tremendous push there. So to your question, why does this happen? Like, Indian industry doesn't want to encourage R&D. So if you're a startup company, unfortunately, if the companies don't want to take that risk with you, you would have to look abroad. And here's a second reason, by the way, which is something that, again, it's secondhand information that I got, which is like a lot of the venture capitalists firms in India also would fund startups that actually have US and European clients, not Indian clients, right? So I think so the entire ecosystem is kind of geared towards looking for customers outside. And, so from my standpoint, it's like, okay, whatever it takes to make these startups successful. And I think, if that means that giving them some kind of a pathway to getting access to venture capital fund from West Coast or like customers in the West Coast, then I think so be it. So I think that's why Lens Solutions and Arvind actually came into play. Arvind is, he lives in Palo Alto, and right now he's actually in Mumbai. He's
Sure.
he's visiting multiple enterprises. He was in Bangalore, and now he'll be back. But because he's been there, we wanted to get his expertise and his connections. And he's built these kind of incubators in the past. And I think, so really the two big value adds, I think, of the BITSoM AI incubator is, first one is, the access to enterprises. The second one is access to Silicon Valley customers.
What can we do to change this? And the reason I'm asking you this is, Professor, and I'm coming purely from the heart on this one. I mean, we talk about, sovereignty in a big way. Sarvam recently has had a wonderful valuation, and they've raised money, etc. It's brilliant. First time HCL Tech, an IT services company, going ahead and investing $150 million. Wonderful, great. But then we're talking about building models. We're talking about sovereignty. We are constantly going on to that entire perspective. Also, let me add, Mr. Chaplot has been brought on by Sarvam, which I think is a wonderful initiative by Sarvam, because that's one of the most brilliant minds, and that just gives a great shot in the arm to the entire ecosystem, that people are willing to join Indian companies who have been probably at the forefront. I mean, Meera Murati, he's worked with them, he's worked with SpaceX, etc., etc. So that resume is brilliant. And I think that is probably what is required if we are truly wanting to go ahead and be forerunners as far as the AI race is concerned. What needs to be done, Professor, according to you? Research, I agree with you fully and completely.
I think if the same question was placed to any other country in the world, I think the challenge would be way bigger than for India. And the reason I'm saying that is because India is flush with talent.
Yes.
I mean, you can't find, I just had a LinkedIn post just a few days back. It was based on a Stanford study that looked at where do unicorn employees reside, right? Turns out, the first place, no surprises, is California.
Sure.
Second is India.
Fabulous.
So think about it. It's not, we always know that a lot of Indians in Silicon Valley, that's not a surprise. But 12% of US unicorn companies actually reside in India, which means that in your backyard and my backyard are the people who are actually working for the most innovative companies in the world, right? So when you have talent like this, and if you're not able to capitalize, and I think it basically means that there's something really wrong.
Fundamentally wrong somewhere.
Yeah. And I can assure you, I've spoken to enough people. There's not a single person that I know who has said that, oh no, I'm not going to move back to India. Now, I've been in the US for 25 years and I just moved back.
Correct.
Yes, and I think, when I speak to people, everybody wants to come back to India and they want to help, but they are worried about the system, right? And I think the system needs to become, I think I've been fortunate because of BITSoM and BITS Pilani, but I think, other schools, other companies, and I said, going back again, companies also have to be more open-minded to R&D culture, and which is very different from, what some of the biggest companies in India do. So it's R&D requires a different mindset.
Professor, in conclusion, I don't want, it's been a fabulous discussion. So thank you so much for all of your wonderful insights. And truly, you are an institution by yourself. But before I let you go, I have to ask you this. I don't want to end on a doom and gloom note. The fact that we've established, you and I, the problems, fair enough. Let me walk you through this, which I had as a final thought. Now, India's AI ambition, as far as the country has no shortage of talent. We've established that. And it is something which is absolutely something which nobody will disagree with. Now, what it may still lack is everything around the talent. Let me go ahead and list down 4 gaps. Please feel free to add whatever you want to. These are, according to me, the 4 gaps. Capital, mentorship, research, as we've just spoken about, market access, maybe, just maybe, the policy. Now, which one is India actually closest to solving, and which one is, let's say, still years away? And finally, Professor, where can, let's say, an institution like yourselves weigh in to solve this issue, so that, we can allow a lot of the people who want to journey back to India and go ahead and build this wonderful nation?
Yeah, I think the I don't think India lacks capital, right? So I
Okay.
think we have enough capital. I think especially if my pitch is that private industry has to give. I mean, I think private industry has got the money. So I think it's not a question of capital that we lack.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, the biggest problem in my mind is the culture. I think like, when we
Okay.
get somebody like the R&D essentially means that the chance of failure is high,
Hmm.
right? And I think how do you the way you develop an organization that is in R&D is different from the way you would, you know, build a different organization where cost minimization is like your goal, right? I mean,
Sure.
their efficiency is what you would go after. R&D, on the other hand, like Slack, for example, is part of it. I mean, if people can't you can't put people like, for example, from in a 9 to 5 job and say, okay, now go and do your greatest research, right?
True. I
I
agree.
mean, you might be sitting in like a coffee shop somewhere, and like the idea might strike. So I think those are the kinds of things, and it's an ecosystem that needs to build. It's one person by themselves are not good. It's like there's enough research that shows that like when you get a star player from one organization to another organization, they're not as effective because they lack all the other ingredients that went into making them a star in the previous place. So I think that's I think what in terms of like what we can do from here, and what I'm trying to do here is like essentially what I'm trying to when I moved to India, I moved here. Obviously, I'm optimistic. I mean, rather than the doom and gloom, I really do. I think there are problems, and as an academic, I feel it's my responsibility to point out the weaknesses so
Fabulous.
that we improve. Having said that, I mean, I'm like optimistic. I mean, I packed up my bags and I moved to India. So
Nice.
be here if I was not optimistic, right? So I think what I want to do here with this venture is actually show the art of possible. Like, look, we have the
Wonderful.
talent, we have we have an incredible set of students, we have like what it requires is like that ecosystem, like get everything
Hmm.
together
Hmm.
and show that this is possible, right? And once that is demonstrated, I really think that this capitalism will. I believe in capitalism enough that things will take over from there on.
You know what, Professor? What you've just said is wonderfully courageous that you move back, and you move back with trying to shine the beacon of light in a big way as far as the entire ecosystem is concerned. I agree. We need to go ahead and build from the mindset, from the cultural point of view, etc., and all of that. And I think we're on the right path when I talk about, let's say, and I'm pretty sure you're going to agree with me. One wonderful example which happened very recently is Skyroot.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So in
Yeah,
my head,
yeah,
maybe, just maybe, that could be something that we can all learn from. And we can all
yeah,
go ahead and say that they did it. They put us
yeah,
on the overall global perspective.
yeah,
Why can't we do it with so
yeah.
many other ecosystems as well?
Yes, and building a skyroot is actually way more harder. I mean, it's
For
like
sure.
hardware technologies are like harder. AI, on the other hand, is actually like much more accessible technology, right? So I
True.
think if we've actually, I mean, we've gone to the Mars, right? I mean, like it is not the hardest that we are unable to do. India has always been great when it comes to solving the hardest problem. It's more
Yeah.
like the middle, which we need like lots of entrepreneurs. Like we want many thousands of them because we are a large country, and now is the opportunity.
Fabulous. Professor,
Mhm.
thank you so much for this particular conversation. And I really hope and pray that you continue to go ahead and show the light ahead as far as this path is concerned, and truly make a wonderful change, a change which is palpable, to go ahead and ensure that a lot of those wonderful minds are coming back to India to contribute to the overall ecosystem. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sudhi. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Pleasure, sir. Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Please do let us know what are your thoughts in the comments below. This, ladies and gentlemen, is Front Page by the IIM Network. Like, share, subscribe, and always remember, think AI, think AIM.